Hi, I'm Ben.
I'm Jenn.
This is Philosophy Friday. So thought that we'd do something a little bit off the path of some of what we've done before for this one, since on Monday, did the 1 year memorial show for Michael. And on Wednesday for the Q&A stream, a lot of that was kind of continuing that. So thought that to kind of wrap all that up for Philosophy Friday, we would talk about, or at least use as kind of a jumping off point, for what we talk about today, the chapter of Michael's book, Against the Web, where the one about Sam Harris, because that's the one where there's a lot of stuff about philosophy in it. What are thought experiments, what you can and can't use thought experiments to show, the trolley problem, the exchange between Harris and Chomsky, which a lot of that is about whether intentions are morally important in a way that the foreseen consequences of your actions aren't. So all very Philosophy Friday rich material.
It is Friday, and we do love philosophy.
So there you go. So Against the Web is book that Michael published in spring of 2020 with Zero Books, and which is also the publisher of both of my books, which is how I originally knew Michael, through our mutual editor, Doug Lane. And I need to go back to it, actually. I should be doing videos for Zero right now, but I used to do a lot of videos for the Zero Books.
It's not like you don't have anything to do.
Yeah, but I feel bad. It's been a while since I did one. But yeah, I used to do videos for the Zero Books YouTube channel all the time. I remember walking to I think it was like a Jacobin issue launch party in Brooklyn, and in early 2019, very early 2019 maybe. And the first guy I saw there was like, "Oh, I know you. You're Zero Books." Which, yeah, today, sadly, I don't think anybody would identify me as being Zero Books. But in any case, so, and the subject of the book, or at least kind of the jumping off point for the book, is this group of guys who were referred to. I think there's this article in the New York Times in 2017 or 18, I don't remember, that referred to them as the intellectual dark web, the dark web is stuff that doesn't show up in Google searches. So, it's where people go to buy drugs and guns online and stuff like that.
Where I get my guns.
Sure. If you want to find a contractor online, take out a hit on someone, maybe you do it on the dark web.
That's where I find my hitman.
But so the metaphor is that their ideas, were so dangerous that it was like an intellectual equivalent of having to go onto the dark web. And so primarily the sort of leading figures in there were Brett and Eric Weinstein, Jordan Peterson. Good evening, Silver. And Ben Shapiro and Sam Harris, who's the guy who we'll primarily talk about today. And it's the longest chapter, of Against the Web is about Harris, and
it's basically half the book.
Yeah. Michael had a lot to say about Sam Harris. And
no, I only hire men, Gary. I only hire men.
Yes, no hit women.
No hit women.
But yeah. So the structure of the book is more or less that Michael has chapters. There's the opening is kind of situating everything he's going to do later in the book, and then he has chapters about Harris and Shapiro and Peterson. and then he goes to the part that he was actually most interested in, which is the last chapter, where he lays out his positive vision. I mean, all the conversations I ever had with him about the book, that's what he kind of got most excited about. But certainly out of the negative part, the Harris thing was probably the biggest part. And yeah, I wonder if that's a thing somewhere where you contract an assassin and they give you a pseudonym, but they are very careful to give you the correct pronouns that you should use in communicating with them. But in any case, I think Harris is a foil for Michael in the book for a couple reasons. Part of which, of course, the biggest part of which is political, but then I think there's also a certain kind of posture that Harris often has that that I think that I think really particularly annoyed Michael. That was this sort of this kind of news from nowhere, like all of my opinions are based on science, and if you disagree with me, you just disagree with science, thing that Harris often does, right? So like, Harris's moral view seems to be just like regular like act utilitarianism. Like certainly when he makes moral arguments, they seem to be act utilitarian arguments.
Seems fair that way,
Sure. So,
it's like hunting. You have to give the deer a gun in order for it to be fair.
Right, of course. Would they make special guns for deer, or how's that work?
I think they would have to, given that whole thumbs and hooves issue.
Sure. So yeah, when Harris explains his views, sometimes it sounds like his moral views. Sometimes it sounds almost Aristotelian, like he really likes the word flourishing. But when he applies them, he makes moral arguments. It seems to be just straightforward act utilitarianism, which is just the view. Well, actually, here, what's act utilitarianism? I've been talking for a while.
Well, we've all been enjoying it. Act utilitarianism is when you decide what the right thing to do is in a certain situation by looking at your choices, seeing whichever one would bring about the best consequences, and that's the one that's the right thing to do.
Right. As opposed to rule utilitarianism.
As opposed. Oh, am I supposed to be explaining that one too?
I mean, if you like.
Which is that So in act utilitarianism, you are evaluating each act as a discrete thing in itself. And then with rule utilitarianism, you have a set of rules which, if followed, would overall maximize utility, maximize the good. So then you think about, well, which of these actions is in line with the rules that will maximize utility, and that action is the right one to do. It may not maximize utility in that particular action, in that particular circumstance, but you're not evaluating each act on your own, on its own, I mean. Right. So, yeah. You evaluate it for how well it follows the utility maximizing rules.
Right. So both views are views according to which the standard of morality is utility, how much happiness or suffering something causes, but they differ in like what you should use that standard to evaluate. General practices or particular actions. And when Harris makes moral arguments, he said like some of the infamous examples that are covered in that chapter are torture is acceptable because what if there's a ticking bomb, and all of that, and even like a nuclear first strike would be acceptable if some dangerous Islamic state were getting, on the brink of, or had, I'm not quite clear on the limits of that.
Aren't they always on the brink? Wasn't that the idea? Time is not on our side.
Yeah. That's,
sorry, Rolling Stones, but
yeah. That's so. Yeah, the quote in The End of Faith, Harris's book, where he lays out the nuclear first strike. Well, he calls it a thought experiment, although that's something Michael gets into, how this is not actually what was normally meant by a thought experiment. He says that, well, look, what if you had a Middle Eastern state that, that's ruling? He's a little vague about what would qualify, whether like Iran, for example, as it actually exists, would, or only like ISIS or something. But he says that like dangerous Muslim states, getting nuclear weapons, which would actually justify in his mind doing a first strike to take them out before that it's he says time that this he says he uses some terminology about how like that makes clear that he thinks that there's a good chance of this happening. He says time is not on our side, and so these are very like act utilitarian arguments, right? Because they're arguments for doing things that would like normally rule utilitarians often try to say, look, all the normal moral principles that you like, we could explain in utilitarian terms, because if we don't lie and we don't steal and all that stuff over time, the following these rules will lead to more utility than not. But what Harris is doing when he makes these arguments, the torture argument and the nuclear first strike argument, is like, here's something that would seem to be like wildly in violation of what, if you think there are like general moral rules that would seem to, on the face of it at least, would seem to be wildly in violation of these rules, but the consequences are so good, or the consequences of not doing it are so bad that you should do it anyway. And Harris often does this weird thing where he'll say, David Hume and these people thought that there was this big difference between facts and values, but that's not actually true. Actually, science can tell us what our moral values should be.
Science.
Yes, and he makes some pretty weird arguments for this. I mean, if you want to deeper dive on this part, you can look at the episode that we did with Mark Warren and Ryan Lake and Gene Bajalan at the very end of Give Them an Argument Season 1. I don't remember the number of the episode, but the title, which is an exaggeration, there's some poetic license here, but the title of the episode is Sam Harris is Wrong About Everything. And I'm sure he's not literally wrong about everything. There's probably a whole list of things that he's not wrong about. But he says one of the arguments that he'll make is, well, science. We all agree that like science can tell us about health, and health is like morality. That sure, you could maybe, somebody could disagree about what outcome counted as healthy, but come on, we all kind of know what counts as what like physical states of the body count as healthy, and science can tell you how to get those, and that morality is like that. And he uses one of his arguments is he says, imagine the worst possible misery. Every single human being and other sentient being that exists is in the maximum possible amount of pain and suffering. And he says, well, you agree that would be bad, right? Which, sure. The everybody and everything is in hell scenario, that would be bad.
That's when you're like, okay.
Well,
where is this going?
And it says, well, if you agree that would be bad, you agree that moral goodness and badness are about happiness and suffering. And so therefore what is morally, what we should, the moral landscape, as he says, is about trying to navigate our way to the best possible consequences. So how does this argument strike you?
Who, me? Or just in
I mean,
general?
Only people here are you, and there's the dog under the desk.
Lucy, what do you think about this?
All right, she's not talking.
You're gonna have to just keep talking.
Okay, so I think it's a pretty weird argument.
Me too.
Because, first, okay, so
I think I got distracted on exactly what argument you were talking about.
Yeah, the worst possible misery would be bad. Therefore, we all agree that moral goodness and badness are about good and bad consequences. Therefore, morality is all about trying to get the best possible consequences.
Yeah, it seems iffy.
Yeah, it seems pretty iffy, right? Like, I think one thing is there's a slippage from
bad to bad.
Okay.
To bad.
I like that that's kind of cryptic, but do you want to unpack that a little bit?
Well, when we say that everyone being miserable is bad, I don't know that carries any moral connotations. It just seems like, if I have a cold, it's bad, but does that mean that something morally wrong has happened? If a hurricane comes through, it's bad. Chris Paul didn't win the championship, bad. But does any of this have to do with morality? It doesn't seem so.
Yeah, maybe if you're causing hurricanes, that's morally bad. Like if like a mad scientist has a hurricane generating machine.
Sure.
Then what the mad scientist is doing is morally bad.
But going back to reality.
Sure. Yeah. So that's one. So right. So that's one thing, and then even if you say okay.
We are cool. I agree. We're very cool.
Yeah.
We're exceptionally cool.
Yeah, no, everybody knows there's a statute of limitations that once a book has been out for enough years, no matter.
And we are so cool that we ignore that and do our own thing.
No matter how popular or influential it is, no matter how many copies it still sells every week, if the book has been out for a certain number of years, and even if the very famous author of that book still stands by everything he says in it, once the statute of limitations is
We're
expired,
renegades. That's what we are.
I like this. Casual philosophy says, imagine a state where everyone has the maximum amount of Cheez-It dust on their fingers while try to use the computer. That would be bad. So morality is about minimizing Cheez-It dust on our fingers.
Cheez-Its are just gross anyway, so we've already got a problem once we start talking about Cheez-Its.
Yeah. But I also think that there is something real about the structure of Harris's argument that example brings up that is a further problem, right? So the first problem you point out is it's not totally clear that we're using the word bad in the same way.
This is called equivocation.
Right?
It's a fallacy.
It is a fallacy.
I'll be a fallacy bro right now. Or fallacy sis. Fallacy!
So that's one problem. That plausibly you might think there's equivocation here between different senses of bad. And then another problem is, look, even if we agree that causing suffering is morally bad, all else being equal, which, I think we should.
Sure, I'm on board with that.
Yeah, right. Maybe under some circumstances you have to serve some greater good or something, but all else being equal, causing suffering is morally bad. And alleviating it is morally good, and maybe even causing happiness is morally good, although it's not totally clear to me that in every case you say, oh, you did a morally good thing, but, maybe. But I also think... Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, man.
Yep, it is.
Man, imagine if we were criticizing like Immanuel Kant, right?
Or Plato.
Right. Yeah, Plato.
Woo-hoo.
Plato, you really can't criticize his arguments.
We don't have the guts for that.
You know, those were thousands of years ago. Like,
we're not that cool. Our coolness has limits.
Yeah. But yeah. So then, like, the other thing is, even if we do think we're using bad the same way here, all right, sure, causing pain is bad, morally bad. But there's also a slippage from causing pain is morally bad to causing pain is the only thing that's morally bad, or avoiding pain and promoting pleasure is the only thing that's morally good. Like, it could be that, you know, I mean, this is going to be a very deep philosophical thought. You probably want to brace yourself for this. You're going to have to think about it for a while after I say it. That's going to...
Hold on, y'all. Hold
on. Yeah, more than one thing can be bad.
Oh, God. Where are the smelling salts?
Yeah. All right, I know we're probably all going to have to pause the stream for 5 minutes while everybody processes that insight that more than one thing can be bad.
Why didn't you give me a heads up on this?
But yes, also more than one thing can be good. Like it could be that yes, causing suffering is bad, but also violating people's intrinsic moral rights is bad.
It's like saying, you know, carrots are good for the health, therefore our entire diet should be based on carrots.
Right. Yeah. So like, so for example, think about the trolley problem, which we've talked about before on Philosophy Friday. We don't need to go through a whole like thing, but
pretty sure everybody knows the trolley. People who are into philosophy definitely know the trolley problem, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, take the second version of the trolley problem, that you can save 5 people by pushing one dude onto the tracks. Well,
that's my favorite part.
You are minimizing the amount of death in the world.
That is true.
Minimizing the amount of grieving, assuming all these people have as many people who love them, etc. Right? So you are avoiding pain and promoting pleasure by doing this.
That you are.
Nevertheless, you might think very coherently. You might think that it would still be bad to push the dude onto the train tracks.
You would think
because. And that can't be because the consequences are bad, because clearly the consequences of doing it are much better than the consequences of not doing it.
Yeah.
So
that's why people pull the lever.
Right. Exactly. So this suggests that, again, more than one thing is bad. And also...
Hi, J. Andrew.
Okay.
No.
So, intellectual dark web. No.
Grab a fainting couch.
Oh man, yeah. If he's going to go back to the beginning of the video. Oh man, not true, but this is awesome. Because Sam Harris does have a very like good radio voice. Like I think that's one thing you got to say for him. It's a very soothing voice. And he seems to be pretty much a straight up Benthamite utilitarian. So the idea
Pushpin is just as good as poetry.
Yeah. It's a Barry White impersonator reading Jeremy Bentham quotes. So yeah. Then one of the points that Michael makes in the Sam Harris chapter of Against the Web is that, he brings up the trolley problem and says, all right, Sam Harris, basically when people get mad at him, Sam Harris takes refuge in, guys, this is just a thought experiment.
I didn't mean that.
Right.
I just wanted to think about it.
And so Michael's point is that thought experiment actually means something specific that this doesn't really fit, right? So when Harris says, like, I think he even uses phrases like, in our current war on terror, we might have, it's like, no, you're saying, here's a thing that might come up and here's what I think we should do. Like that's not a thought experiment. If you say, oh, man, looks like, sooner or later time is not on our side, you might get one of these dangerous, Muslim states getting nuclear weapon, and so we might have to nuke them. Obviously, that would be terrible. And which, by the way, I think the idea that you've sort of, well, look, I said it would be terrible.
Okay. Well, if you said that, then what are we even talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit. Michael has a very mild version of this in the book, but I remember when we were talking about this, he had a much funnier and cruder version of this point that he would make conversationally, which you can probably imagine, right? It's of the format, hey, I might have to come up with fun ways to end that sentence. I mean, obviously that would be terrible if I had to do that, but, I might have to. The obviously that would be terrible doesn't really negate the fact that you're proposing a terrible thing, but
no.
And it's and again, you're talking about something you think that might actually happen, right? You're making like a prediction and saying, well, if that happens, here's my suggestion. It's not a thought experiment. I mean, a thought experiment is
not a literal suggestion of what we should do in a literal, current, real situation.
Right, right, exactly, right. That's what makes it thought experiment. That you're imagining a hypothetical scenario, and the point of a thought experiment typically is to do one of like a couple of things. One is that a lot of thought experiments are about trying to test definitions. Like, okay, if you think that such and such are the necessary and sufficient conditions for something counting as whatever, free will, something. Knowledge, right? A lot of thought experiments about knowledge. Yeah. Right, so like the Gettier cases, right? Those are classical thought experiments.
Yeah, so we've got this definition of knowledge as justified true belief, and then Gettier comes along and he's like, well, you can see that in these cases, Smith has a justified true belief, but intuitively we would say that Smith does not have knowledge, and so we need to do something about this definition. Now, he doesn't offer up any alternative definitions. He's just like, this doesn't work, I'm out.
Yeah. And then because he convinced lots of people that it doesn't work, then that inspired lots of people trying to come up with their own definition. They'll get around it. This is not a Gettier case. By the way, if you want to watch us talk about the Gettier problem, there is a video of that.
We did?
Not on Philosophy Friday, but...
right. There's a class video that we did.
There's a video that we did about Gettier for our intro classes. It was like proto-Philosophy Friday. But that is set to public. You can find that somewhere. Maybe we'll link to that in the description. But in any case, so this is not an actual Gettier case, but this gives you kind of the like flavor of it, right? Like imagine that... All right, if you can remember this far back, if you're old enough, long time ago, the way that people found out what time it was that they looked either at a watch that was kept on their wrist
or a sundial. That's what Ben did when he was young. He had this really nice sundial out in the backyard.
Not quite that old, but I do remember the era when a very common way of finding out what time it was before we all had phones that we carried around all the time, was that we would look at the wall and there'd be a clock on the wall that said what time it was.
My mom has clocks in every room so that no matter what direction she is facing, she can see the time. Not like big grandfather clocks, but at least, like a little clock. She has them everywhere, in every room, in no matter what direction you're looking in, you can see what time it is.
Sure. I would imagine.
Thanks, Joe.
I would imagine at least half the people who watch this channel are not old enough to remember that. But oh, hey, nice little extra philosophy joke. Yeah, Kant supposedly, was so regular in his habits that the housewives in Königsberg would set their watches, set their clocks,
set their sundial,
set their clocks by his daily walks. It's like, oh, here Kant is out, walking. So
must be too.
Yeah. Okay. So imagine you're back in this bygone era where people found out what time it was by looking at the clock, and you walk into a room and you see, oh, it's 4 o'clock, and so you form the belief that it's 4 o'clock on this basis. Plot twist: 24 hours ago on the dot, the clock broke. So it is just a crazy coincidence that it has the right time, but you have no way of knowing this. This is the first time you glanced at that clock. It sure seems like it's a justified belief because, I mean, this was the standard procedure. You look at the clock and find out what time it was. So you believe it. You have a good justification for believing it.
And it's true because it is 4 o'clock. So you would have a justified true belief, but do you know that it's 4 o'clock? And it seems like the answer to that is no. And so the justified true belief definition does not work.
Right. That's a thought experiment.
That is.
We have a proposed definition of a concept, and we come up with a hypothetical scenario designed to test the definition. Like, okay, in this scenario, all of those conditions would be met, but it really doesn't seem like it should count as an example. Or conversely, this is a scenario that doesn't meet these conditions, but it seems like it should count. So that's like one major kind of thought experiment. The other major kind of thought experiment is what's exemplified by the trolley problem, or by like the Judith, Jarvis, Thomson abortion stuff, which is like if somebody's been kidnapped and connected to a sick violinist, and disconnecting will kill them. Do they still have a right to disconnect? Well, if so, if you think yes, then that shows that you think that the right to bodily autonomy is even more important than the right to life, which could be relevant to the abortion example. You see how the argument, whether you agree with the argument or not, right? You see how that goes. Yeah.
So depending on what you think about the violinist, if you think that, you are obligated to stay hooked up, you have to stay hooked up to the violinist for 9 months. It's not a forever thing, but he will be cured in 9 months as long as you stay hooked up to him. If you don't, then he's going to die. If you think that you are obligated to stay hooked up for that 9 months, then you're exhibiting a belief in the principle that the right to life outweighs the right to bodily autonomy.
Right.
If you think opposite, then you are showing a belief in the opposite principle. So then what you want to do is you want to take that principle and see, am I applying that principle consistently? Like in the trolley problem, if you think 1 death is better, not good, but better than 5 deaths, do you still think that once we get to where you're pushing the guy off the bridge?
Mina, and by the way, somebody, a patron, asked me on Patreon yesterday, said that oftentimes I respond to chats without reading them. So if they're like away in the other room, listening to the stream, they have no idea what I'm talking about. So I'm going to try and do better. Mina says, what would be so terrible about finding fun ways to finish that sentence? That's a question about something earlier in the stream. Nothing at all. I'm just not going to repeat, the terrible thing that he came up with. You can use your imagination. In any case, so Yeah, I mean, and this is Darius asks, even if it's an hour instead of 9 months. Thomson actually addresses that in the article. She says, look, bodily autonomy is really important, so important that she thinks that it can't outweigh the right to life, but like bodily autonomy comes in degrees. Like if you only have to stay hooked up to an hour for an hour, I mean, you might just have to suck it up and stay hooked up, like.
Yeah, and she says, well, maybe it's not technically wrong if you unhook him, even though you have to only have to stay hooked up for an hour, but it doesn't say anything good about you if you aren't willing to stay there for an hour.
Okay, yeah, that's a good correction. She doesn't actually say that it'd be wrong. Right, she doesn't actually say you have to suck it up. She says it wouldn't reflect well on you if you didn't suck it up for an hour.
Yeah, you don't really look like a good guy if you're gonna let the poor man die.
Well, this is very off topic, but the person asked from the Trotskyist. I will just say, read my forthcoming book about Christopher Hitchens, and you can read my thoughts about this in great detail. And
that's enough of that.
And that's enough of that. But yeah, so then, so these are things that thought experiments make sense as a way to find out that, like, if you want to.
Hang on. Yeah, I think that's what they're referring to. That's something that's not going to happen. So it's not. Yeah, that's another one.
Yes, it's somewhere in that paper she came up.
Anyway, let me finish what I was going to say, is that you're not emotionally connected to this idea of being hooked up to the violinist because this is not going to happen. And this is why a lot of thought experiments involve aliens, because we're not emotionally connected to whatever alien scenario we come up with. So it's easier to think more rationally because our emotions are not as engaged.
Right. So yeah, Casual Philosophy says somewhere in that paper she came up with a thought experiment involving being stuck in a house with an ever-expanding baby. Sounds like a good indie horror movie idea. Fair enough.
Yeah, this was supposed to be analogous to a pregnancy that threatens the woman's health or threatens the woman's life. And the violinist example was supposed to be analogous to a pregnancy through rape.
Right. So in... So all of these things are things that it makes sense to use thought experiments to evaluate. Like in the knowledge case, what we're trying to figure out is not something about how the world is. Like if you want to figure that out, as Michael says in the book, you need to do an experiment. You need to actually go out and empirically check. Just thinking about it, right? Probably isn't going to do you very much good.
Don't be an armchair scientist.
Right. But if what you want to know, like in the knowledge case, is, okay, what do we mean by knowledge? Then yeah, thought experiments make perfect sense for that. You come up with like a carefully constructed hypothetical situation that like would test, would I call that knowledge? If not, that tells me something about what I mean by knowledge. Or like the Judith Jarvis Thomson case, sick violinist, expanding baby, all that stuff. Or the trolley
People seeds.
People seeds, yes. Can't forget about the people seeds blowing through the window. So
put a screen on that window.
Yeah. And I have to say, I like that paper a lot, and I agree with almost everything she says in it. But I also always thought the people seeds thing was a little. Not just that it's whatever, but like
it's a thought experiment.
But also like in a world where people grew from people seeds, I'll bet like they would have huge taboos against sweeping up those seeds. Like that would like, don't you think?
Wow.
Like that would probably be like a death penalty offense in that world, to crush a people seed, But
well, you just can't go into an embryo storage facility,
right?
And sweep them all up. You can't do that,
right? Exactly. But in any case, like those Judith Jarvis Thomson examples or the trolley problem, which is also kind of Judith Jarvis Thomson. The original thing came from Philippa Foot, but then she like did her own version of it. But like these, or the Gettier stuff, but like the sticking with the moral ones, the trolley problem and the sick violinist and all that. These are also things that make sense to use thought experiments to evaluate, because what you're trying to figure out is, what you like, what moral values you care about. And yeah, thinking about hypotheticals in which, okay, here's a hypothetical situation in which these two values came into conflict. What seems to me to be the right, morally right thing to do in that scenario? Sure, that could absolutely tell you something about what you value, what you care about.
And it tells you more, that I think, than just thinking about the actual, because talking about abortion, that can be an emotional topic for some people, and it's difficult to think rationally when your emotions are very bound up in something. So if you look at something that you can think about more dispassionately, you can come up with a better idea of, okay, these are my principles that I should be applying to these situations, rather than just have your emotions flying all over the place and making emotionally based decisions.
Right, that makes sense. That you have because you already have you already have certain feelings about abortion, and so it's going to be very hard to take a step back from those feelings to try to figure out what the underlying principles are. But you don't really have feelings about people getting hooked up to violinists, because that's never come up before.
If you're a very sick violinist, this may not be the thought experiment for you. Yeah.
I had a student once in an intro class who thought that the Frankfurt cases about mind control manipulation stuff, which are again supposed to test
thought experiment,
what we mean by free will, that these are experiments, that these are things that I don't know, some evil scientist somewhere actually,
Black did not really implant a mind control device into Smith. Didn't happen.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, these are things, and in both cases, what we're ultimately clarifying are our own intuitions about what something means, or our own moral intuitions. And sure, thought experiments could be good for that. I mean, they're good ways of clarifying what we think. But that's not at all the same thing as saying, hey, here's something I think might happen, and if it does, here's what we should do.
Yeah.
That's not.
I mean, I guess if we think about this, then if someone does wake up having been kidnapped and hooked up to a violinist, then we have decided what we should do.
I guess, right? But I mean,
if we find ourselves trapped in a house with a forever growing baby, we know what we should do.
There you go. It's like The Good Place, where Michael makes the trolley problem real.
Mm-hmm. There is you can, I may have mentioned this before, but you can find that online actually. I think it's Minefield that did it, where they set people up to face what they thought was a real life trolley problem.
Yeah, that seems unethical.
It really does.
Just traumatize people to find out what they would hypothetically do.
It really does seem traumatizing, but hey, they had psychologists involved, and so it was all okay. But anyway, it's really interesting. So if you're interested in that, I think it's Minefield that did that.
Yeah. So thought experiment doesn't just mean I get to make it up and you don't get to get mad at me. It means using a hypothetical situation to test a principle or a definition. So that's one of the sort of philosophical points that's covered in the Harris chapter of Against the Web. But the other big one we haven't covered yet is maybe I don't know if one of the more interesting ones is the stuff about intentions, since he talks extensively about a
Where did it go?
which well, no, I mean, I think oftentimes like thought.
The author does think like the China brain. The author definitely thinks that, okay, this is what people are going to think about this, and that will show them XYZ. So there's, sometimes there's definitely, okay, it is clear that most people's intuitions are going to go this way.
Yeah. Do you want to say quickly what the China brain is?
So there's a theory called functionalism, which is that anything that functions as a mind is a mind. So Ned Block comes up with this idea where he's arranged the people of China as neurons, and they have walkie-talkies so they can talk to each other, and the communication is stronger with the neurons next to you, and less strong with the neurons that are farther away from you, and you're arranged just like a human brain. And there's a robot who, like, if you poke the robot in the eye, the neurons will configure themselves just like our neurons would do if we got poked in the eye. And the idea is, well, if anything that functions as a mind is a mind, then this is a brain, this is a mind, because it's functioning as one. And the idea that, Ned Block is like, clearly this shows us that functionalism is false. So it's not like he set this up and he's like, all right, guys, what do you think about it? Because he's setting it up in such a way to bring us to a certain conclusion.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's very often the case, that like thought experiments are there to establish some premise.
Yeah, kind of push you towards accepting or not accepting certain things.
Right. It's not like Judith Jarvis Thomson hadn't sorted out what she thought about abortion before she came up with the sick violinist case. I mean, that's an attempt to see, okay, here's this principle, and you're likely to think that this is the most important principle, but what about this scenario where this other thing seems like it would be more important?
Yeah, and I think she thought that most people were going to say, well, obviously you've been kidnapped. You didn't agree to be hooked up to this violinist. That's a crucial part of the setup, is that you were kidnapped. You wake up and you're already hooked up. And she thinks most people are going to say, no, you don't have an obligation to stay hooked up for the next 9 months.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually an interesting question about how much it changes if you agree and then you change your mind. Like, are you just not allowed to change your mind for the next 9 months? Maybe, right? I mean, maybe it would be like more like the what she says about the being hooked up for an hour, that like maybe you have a right to change your mind, but we would think less of you.
Yeah.
If you did.
Sometimes exercising your rights may not be the best thing to do.
Right. I mean, it does seem like, I mean, I think some moral theories would have trouble making sense of this thought, but intuitively it does seem like you can have a moral right to do something. In other words, it's not wrong that you're doing it, but nevertheless, you doing that thing that you have a moral right to do makes you a jerk.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that so there's this chat that said, I'd love to see Ben debate Gad. So it was Gad Saad. I don't know how to pronounce that.
What is a Gad?
Is this dude's first name. Gad Saad. I don't know how you say it, but he's a I don't know. I actually think somewhat similar to some of these other these figures that Michael is talking about in the book, although I think maybe a little bit less interesting. But but I misread this at first, and I thought, just say I'd love to see Ben debate God. I don't think that would go well. God is all knowing. So,
and Ben is not.
Yeah, I'm
sorry, y'all. You're busting out the fanning couches again, but Ben is not all knowing.
yeah, I forget stuff from like a couple days ago all the time. So, when was that count? Let's see. What do we do on Wednesday?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think I would win a debate with an all-knowing bayonets.
Yeah, well, I told him something this morning, and then we were out to lunch with our aunt a couple hours ago, and he asked me about it. I was like, we discussed this morning. I told you about this morning, and he just looked at me blank-eyed, and I was like, well, obviously we're not listening, but what ifs.
I still think you're gaslighting me about that one, but in any case, yeah. So in any case, all right. What we were going to talk about, we got sidetracked, and I don't quite.
Did we?
Yeah, I mean, I literally don't remember where we were a minute ago, so I guess this is an extreme demonstration of what we were just talking about. I think I have a decent memory, but
yeah, the Chinese room, that's a great thought experiment.
Yeah,
that really does.
Although
it really does prove what it is supposed to prove, I think.
If Ek and Erica is watching this, he's going to get a past guest and frequent viewer who's a philosophy guy, and I think from what I know about his views about philosophy of mind, he's probably getting really mad about the, it's like, no, it doesn't prove it, but calm down. But yeah.
You can fight me later.
But in any case, so Harris has this exchange with Noam Chomsky that Michael discusses at length in the chapter, which is obviously about some immediate political stuff, but the issue that it ends up really revolving around, that's more Philosophy Friday appropriate, is about whether how focused we should be morally on intentions, and whether intentions are the only kinds of things that we should care about. In other words, and I think that my hot take on this is that Harris didn't quite understand what Chomsky was saying, but because I don't think Chomsky was saying that intentions are completely irrelevant, right? It doesn't matter what your intended consequences of your actions are, which would be a crazy view. It clearly does matter what the intended consequences of your actions are. And sometimes people get confused by that, by the way, like in these things or the context. If they hear me say that I'm not a utilitarian, they say, oh, but don't you think that like sometimes, the utility of something is morally important? Yeah, it's morally important all the time, right? It's just see above me, more than one thing can be bad. Like it's not that avoiding suffering isn't a good. Of course it is. Certainly I think in most political contexts, it's usually the most relevant good. It's just that it's not the only thing that can be morally important. But anyway, Chomsky, in any case, I don't think is denying the intended consequences of actions are important. But I think the point that Chomsky is making is that we can morally criticize somebody for their actions for reasons other than that we think that they intended that specific consequence. So the immediate context has to do with this case of a pharmaceutical plant being bombed because of an accusation that it was also going to be used to manufacture chemical weapons, but it produced this massive amount of the pharmaceuticals in the Sudan. But I think you can generalize this to other cases where you drop a bomb on some area and it kills a whole bunch of innocent people, and or whatever, you can do the terrorist version, you set off a bomb and it kills a bunch of innocent people, and one ground that you could have for criticizing that is, I think that the bomber intended that all these innocent people died. They specifically wanted to kill them. And if that's the case, yeah, sure. I mean, that's certainly a good ground to morally criticize the bomber. But then I think Chomsky's point is this the only thing that can be true about the bomber's intentions that would make us morally criticize this action? So in other words, if it's like, maybe you wouldn't criticize it at all morally if the person who's doing it had no idea that there was any risk that they'd be killing innocent people. If it's just totally news to them. If you were in some Ender's Game kind of scenario, then sure, maybe you wouldn't morally criticize them at all. People who stepped away and are just listening to all this, that seems like a very inappropriate time to start laughing. But Gloomy Cleric says in the chat, what if I set off a bomb in a city full of Hitler clones?
Yeah, suppose we kill all these innocent people with a bomb.
Yeah, so if you kill all these innocent people and your intention was to kill them, okay, that's bad. And if you had no idea that you kill innocent people and you're horrified that it happened and you wouldn't have done it if you'd realized this might happen, then and you did all the research you could be expected to do and it's just some horrible tragedy that you had no way of knowing about or preventing, then maybe we can't criticize you at all, right? That it's a tragedy, but it's not your fault. But Chomsky's point is that there are really important points in between this, some of which might be almost as bad or maybe even just as bad in his view. I think this is something, philosophically controversial, but that like are states of mind that you could have that about the intention, and specifically says, okay, so if generals are talking about dropping a bomb and they know that it'll kill lots of innocent people, and they don't specifically intend to kill them. It's not like if everybody got to safety in time, that damn it, my intentions have been foiled. But also they're just like callously indifferent to it. Then that's also morally, criticizable. That if it's just, like Chomsky uses the analogy, if it's just like, stepping on an ant, right? That's your view about the people that you're killing. Then that he thinks that's in a way even more monstrous. This just level of indifference to human life. I think in that exchange, Harris, like I said, I don't think he quite gets Chomsky's point, right? He's in this very narrow, no, we are the good guys, they are the bad guys. They intend to kill people. We don't intend to kill people. What are you talking about? Kind of mode. But I think there is maybe a more interesting or controversial point that's buried in all this. That even if you think, okay, Harris would have been better off sitting this one out, but you could still think that there is a claim that Chomsky is still making that you might still push back against, right? Because I think that this is veering more into reasonable people can disagree territory, which is callous indifference to the effects of your actions as bad as specifically intending those consequences? Is one of those things worse than the other? You might think that they're both really bad, but maybe.
Hopefully you think they're both really bad.
Yes.
I would assume.
Right. Yes. All right. So let's take it as a given that they're both really, really, really bad. But you might still think that there's an important difference between them. I don't know if you have any.
I think that actually intending to harm them, I think that's worse, because it seems like there you have a full understanding of what's relevant, and the indifference thing, it makes me feel like there's something that you're not grasping, and maybe that you can't be blamed for that if there's something that you just don't get, like the value of human life. Maybe you just don't get that.
I mean, you could say the same thing about like intending, though. Maybe I would think like if your goal is like, I don't know, people, you set off a bomb and you think people will really pay attention to our demands. Like or like, I don't know, think about like somebody who's like a hostage situation. Somebody starts shooting the hostages, and it's not that they hate the hostages. They just think, well, if like this will show them that we're serious, and then we'll get that, plane with $1 million or whatever that we're asking for in this hostage situation. In that case, you are specifically intending to kill them, but you might think that it's like the ground on which you would criticize that is the same maybe as like if you're, I don't know, you just start like driving, trying to think of a non-bombing example, like maybe you're if you, I remember Howard Zinn using this a long time ago as an analogy. Like if you're driving through an alley crowded with innocent people at 90 miles an hour, and you don't specifically intend to kill any of them, but you're just taking a shortcut or whatever. But you are objectionably indifferent to the lives of the people that you're mowing down. Then it seems like, if I think about, okay, what's the criticizable thing about that person, then it seems like maybe that's the same thing as the criticizable thing about the hostage taker, that they're not valuing human life properly.
Yeah, but I would question why that is.
Okay.
Is there something that prevents that? Whereas if you're taking joy in it, it's because you do recognize the value. Like we don't take joy in destroying things that we don't think are valuable. So at least that like it's expressing something bad about you, whereas not understanding the value, I don't necessarily think that it is.
Yeah, so I guess maybe
you may not be blameworthy for your lack of understanding.
Yeah, so I guess in that case it matters. The distinction isn't necessarily intending to kill people versus being callously indifferent to the people that you're killing. The distinction is like taking like malicious joy in the result versus just like not caring about it, like which it could be that like in the hostage taking example too, you don't like, it could be that you just don't have any particular feelings one way or the other about the hostages you're shooting, because it's a means to an end.
I think that's some sort of deficiency in you that may not necessarily be a morally evil thing.
In both cases, both the hostage case and the
yes. Kind of lost the thread of all these cases, but I mean, like if it's because you don't recognize the value.
Sure, I'm just okay. So my only point, like taking a step back from the cases, my only point was that I mean, I see what you're saying, that like somebody who is taking malicious joy in the result.
Yeah, that seems like the worst case scenario.
Because then like that almost suggests they do recognize the trouble.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's like what I was saying. If you're taking joy in destroying something, it's because you recognize that it's valuable.
Right. So that makes sense to me, right? I think I agree with that part, that the person who's taking malicious joy is actually morally worse than the person who perhaps just doesn't, there's something wrong with them such that they don't recognize the value of that which they're destroying. That makes perfect sense to me. My only point I was trying to make through all the cases, was that the person who, like, there are examples where intentionally killing could be a result.
Doesn't imply taking joy.
Doesn't imply taking joy. It could just be like it's a means to an end, and like the criticizable thing.
But why is it a means to an end? It's a means to an end because they're valuable.
Yeah, that's true. Or at least you recognize that other people think they're valuable.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting point. Oh, super chat. Wicked Energy, thank you for the super chat. Says, if you have children knowing they will suffer and eventually die, is that immoral? Any thoughts on anti-natalism? I'll just say no.
No, I'm going to agree with that.
I mean, if you had the option to have immoral children, maybe that'd be even better. But no, I mean, I think because if you were going to say that it's wrong to bring somebody into the world who will go through, what all life goes through, then that would mean saying, like, I've never understood why some people who seem to have that position don't also say, like, look, if it's better to not exist, I mean, you could bring about your own non-existence anytime.
You could.
And if you don't, that suggests, and I don't want to be too flippant about psychology here, but I mean like that, but like the fact that not only you don't, but that you don't think you should, suggests that you think that despite the fact that life does involve suffering and certainly death, that you still think that it's worth it.
Yeah.
So.
Now, if we should have children knowing that there are children out there needing to be adopted, that's a whole other
so you don't have to be an anti-natalist to think that. You just think like, because you could say, well, theoretically, if there were no children that needed to be adopted, but if there are, right?
Yeah, if there are, then I don't think you should be having children.
Okay, I wouldn't say that, but that is maybe.
I have a very like it's just like. Yeah. If you're gonna have the parenting experience, then that's the way you should have it.
Okay, I wouldn't say that for the record. I think that.
Well, that's fine. My views are mine alone.
I think it's legitimate to want to have your own children, and if it's okay not to have children, then then it's okay to have your own children. That's my view. But
see your own children. If you adopt them, they are your own children.
Okay, but it's legit. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a desire for biological children.
I think the only reasons why you would prefer to have or that you would want to have a biological child over having an adopted child, I think all of those are selfish reasons. But again, those are my views only. Don't hold that against Ben.
Yeah, I don't think that's. I mean, in a sense, right? I mean, you're trying to pursue like your own vision of how you want your life to be, but I mean, I don't think that's like illegitimately selfish. I think that's like I think that's something that it's totally legitimate to.
But why is it so important that the child be biologically connected to you? Is it because you want them to look like you, to be like you? That it just seems like either the reasoning is selfish or it's an inflated ego. And I think that either way, those are not good motivations to have for your actions. And that it's just clearly better to, if you want to be a parent,
I don't know.
I just think this is so obvious. I know.
I think if you're not wronging the children who need adoption by not having children, you're not wronging them by having biological children. And I think that, like, as far as why somebody would care about like passing on their genes or whatever, I mean, I think that's like it's not irrational. It's just non-rational. It's an emotional thing that doesn't have to be necessarily justified. I
think under the circumstances, though, it does have to be justified because there are so many children that makes it a thing that needs justifying. And the thing about is it okay to not have children? Well, if you don't want children, bringing a child into that home is not going to be providing a good life for that child. So I think that is acceptable.
But what if it really matters to you very deeply that you have biological children? Then
I don't care.
Then bringing non-biological children into that home is objectionable for the same reason.
But are you really? I think that is a very offensive thing to say to an adopted person. You know, like, you're not this person's real child, or you're not your adopted child's real mother. No. Yeah. But anyway, again, we're off topic here.
But I don't think you have to say real to, like, it could just be that you care about that very deeply, and that's something that's important.
But why? Why do you care about it so deeply?
Because it's an emotional drive.
But what are the things that are behind that emotional drive?
I don't think there has to be anything like that behind it. I don't think it has to be. I don't think you have to, like, think that adopted children aren't, you know, that the adoptive parents aren't real parents or anything like that to have it be that, like, it's something that's meaningful to you, that they be biological. I think that it's okay to have sort of, you know, arbitrary, like, you know, that our brains are built in a certain way, and it's not, you know, it's not harming anybody. I think that's okay. I don't think any parents who are watching this have done wrong, or
I think that our evolutionary,
or that my parents did anything wrong, or that your parents did anything wrong.
I think that our evolutionary impulses, those can be overcome
sometimes. I think it varies from person to person, and that's okay. Let's see. CB Kelly, thank you for the super chat. It's a natural female want to want to baby. Well, I mean, it varies from person to person. I mean, clearly, right? Like not everybody wants the same things, and I'm not the one trying to tell people, you know, how to do this. I think that it's okay to whatever's going to make you happy here, you know, you go for it. Let's see. Yeah, exactly. Not for every woman. But there are only so many characters. Okay, fair enough. Nobody's judging you for the limited super chat, and it's appreciated. Yeah. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, that's my view, Yoda. I think that like, you can have non-rational drives that, like, I don't think there's any particular, like, moral, you know, I think it's like, you know, if it's very, if something is important to you, you know, just because that's how your brain happens to be put together, and you're not wronging anybody or perpetuating anything unjust, or, you know, or whatever.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that's the case in this situation.
John asks, when can we get Ben to shave all his facial hair, but not
never.
But the mustache, yeah, that would be a never. So there's a paper that I remember reading several years ago. I was writing a paper. Actually, we'll talk about this for a future Philosophy Friday. But there's an essay that I've always found really interesting by David Hume about suicide, and so I was like, and Hume trying to explore all the reasons that people think that suicide is wrong. And I was writing something about that, and I was researching that, and I was reading a bunch of related papers, and one of them was called Kant and the Stoics on Suicide. And there's a passage in that paper where the guy's going through all these ancient, like, Roman Stoic philosophers, Greek and Roman Stoic philosophers, and going through their views on when it's acceptable to, like, what's a good enough reason exit, from life. They thought that life was valuable, but under certain circumstances, then it was acceptable and virtuous to end it. And so all of these different, Marcus Aurelius, this, that Stoic philosopher had all these different nuanced views about when, or just they had different views that, you might expect, if you've been like captured and sold into slavery, this and that. And then the end of the paragraph was Epictetus declared that he would die for his beard.
Yeah, you probably die for yours too.
Yeah.
I told my mom last week that I was going to bleach Ben's hair and put some eyeliner on him. I've been watching a lot of Duran Duran videos at the time. And, the keyboardist, Nick Rhodes, he's pretty hot with his bleached hair and his eyeliner. And I was like, why don't I do that to Ben? And my mom told me quite forcefully that was a bad idea.
Yeah, it never got to the point of suggesting this to me. But, so Sam Harris, which Michael mentions this very briefly at the beginning of the chapter, Sam Harris's view about free will. And I think, as far as the conclusion goes, we disagree on that. Or actually, I should be more careful about that. I think the last time we had a big conversation about this, it became clear to me that I didn't fully understand the view that you had about free will quite the way I thought we did. But Sam Harris thinks we don't have free will. I'm aware of that. Yes. Right. I know you're aware of that.
Okay.
I'm clarifying that for anybody who watches this.
Okay.
So because we were asked, what do you think about Sam Harris's view about free will?
We were not asked about our views about people having biological children when their children waiting to be adopted, but we went off on that. So let's actually talk about what the people are interested in.
Yes. So,
dude, everything in philosophy is a lot of semantics. You've caught on to us. Semantics, that's what keeps us in business.
Yeah. So I'm trying. So there's a novel that I really like by Jeffrey Eugenides called The Marriage Plot, where there's this character who's explaining why he majored in philosophy and then why he got disillusioned with it. He says, you think you're going to answer like, what is the meaning of life? But then you end up, getting into, what does it mean to say the meaning of life? What does it mean to say? What does it mean to say? What is the meaning of life?
What was that line from The Simpsons the other day? Unemployment won't just be for philosophy majors anymore.
Yes, useful people are also starting to feel the pinch. That was the casino episode. I'm so proud of you.
Yeah.
Brought up Simpsons unprompted.
I know.
But yeah. So yeah, Harris thinks that we don't have free will. I disagree with that. I think that we do. I think that there are a lot of people.
Yeah.
To be fair, in the earlier part of the stream, I think we did answer almost all of the questions that were mentioned in the stream description. The thing about morality and intentions, the thing about what counts as a thought experiment, the thing about whether science tells us we have to react utilitarians. The only one of the questions that in the description that we didn't answer is Sam Harris a completely ridiculous person? And maybe that one can, as some philosophy papers put it, be left as an exercise for the reader.
The listener.
So yeah, I think that, and this is, I think that a lot of people who are leftists, if there's one Sam Harris view they're going to be sympathetic to, besides maybe the atheism, this is it, right? The free will denial, because I think a lot of people are used to hearing people have free will, they're responsible for their actions, from people who are saying things that oftentimes we don't like and might have very good reasons not to like. That like, oh, we should just like throw the book, at criminals and, lock them up and throw away the key, or that we, poor people should, stop complaining and, take responsibility for,
their poorness.
Their poorness. And so if you have a very bad reaction to those sentiments, which I certainly do too, I can understand how some people end up really disliking talk about free will and moral responsibility. Because we associate it with people being blamed for things that might really be because of larger societal reasons, or at least partially for larger societal reasons, or that you think and I think we should feel more compassion, people in certain situations, even if they do end up doing something wrong. But I think that it's a mistake to conclude from those examples that free will and moral responsibility are concepts that are only going to be bound up with views that we don't like, that aren't going to be bound up with views that you probably hold, that I hold. So, like, if we think that it's really, really bad to think about some of these cases, like war on terror sort of cases, like we were talking about earlier with Harris. Like if you have like a drone strike that that kills an innocent person, even if for the sake of argument it was really true that doing strikes like that overall meant there was less terrorism, and that meant overall fewer people were killed, which is all super controversial. But even if we do assume that for the sake of argument, you might still think, well, there's something particularly morally bad about killing an innocent person, or like if you think about like why we're so disturbed by people who are in prison, even, right? If they who might not have been able to afford good lawyers and and might actually be innocent, why you think that's so disturbing, that you think that whether somebody is in prison or not, like that it's much more morally bad. I mean, this is right up there with more than one thing can be bad. Like, it's much more morally bad for an innocent person to be in prison than a guilty person.
Wait, what?
I know, right? And if you think that, right, like that suggests that you think that it's not just about consequences, because it could be that like having somebody be arrested for a crime has some like deterrent value, that like if everybody thinks they did it, then that'll still help deter other people from acting similarly. And it could be there's some good consequences that are served by this, but you still think, no, that's wrong. And that suggests that you might think that it makes a big moral difference whether somebody is guilty or innocent. And that might be very hard to explain if you don't believe in moral responsibility. So thought. We did a whole stream with Ryan Lake.
We did.
Where we got into free will.
We did.
So if you want to know in much greater detail than this, why I think, and our friend Ryan thinks, that we can have free will even if physical determinism is true, which I think is some of what motivates Harris to say, no, we don't have free will, and why Jenn is much more skeptical about that argument. That's a good expression. And you can check out that previous stream. I will say this, that there are people, and Ryan said this on the Sam Harris episode of the main show, there are people who have the same conclusion as Harris, who I think make really interesting arguments for it. I don't think Harris is the best representative of this conclusion, because he's very quick and glib and sort of says, like basically what he says about compatibilism is, I don't know, that sort of sounds like nonsense, and
that's basically what I tell my students. How could this work?
Whereas there are other
let's
people
move
like Dirk Pereboom, for example, is a philosopher I really like who agrees with Harris. He has the same conclusion about free will. He says there's no such thing. In fact, like Harris, I think he says that whether determinism is true or not, there's no free will. And Pereboom, like I said, I don't agree with him, but I think he makes like a really interesting, really rigorous argument. So, like, you know, if you want to know what a good case for that position looks like, don't read Harris, read Pereboom.
I just whacked my ankle into the desk.
Oh. Recent, thank you, Judith, for the super chat. Recent article, okay, book chapter you might enjoy is Suzanne Bobsing, Frege plagiarized the Stoics. Not familiar with that, but that actually does sound like something I'd be really interested in. So thank you for that recommendation. All right.
Woo!
Yeah, Greg Caruso, he just did a book that I've not read all of, but I've read some of. And what I read was very interesting, of essays back and forth arguing with Daniel Dennett about free will. So yeah, also somebody who understands what compatibilists are saying and has like thoughtful reasons for disagreeing. It isn't just like, I don't know, that sounds like nonsense. All right. Well, I think this has been pretty thorough.
Yeah, I think it's time for you to plug some stuff.
All right, let's plug some stuff. So on Sunday, we for the Sunday night debate breakdown, Conrad Hamilton and Matt McManus are going to be back, and we are going to finish the Zizek Cannon debate breakdown, part 3. I think we will be able to finish it on Sunday.
We all hope.
I saw that look. And on Zizek himself, by the way, is going to be back on the show, give them an argument on in a month or so, like maybe late August, early September.
Outstanding.
So stay tuned for that.
Also, I have openings in my philosophy classes that need to be filled. So if anyone is living in the Atlanta area and would like to take a philosophy class at the Dunwoody campus of Perimeter with me, please sign up for that.
Yep. You heard it here. Wouldn't that be hilarious if there were actually people who from, the YouTube audience,
right,
who just weren't even Perimeter students who just signed up for those classes? But yeah.
Somebody came in and said, "Hi, I'm Silver Harlow."
Yeah, they just came in and be like, "Oh yeah, casual philosophy for me." Yeah. So Jen's classes.
I need enrollment.
So yeah, Sunday finish up the Zizek Cannon breakdown. And on Monday, in the past, as I've mentioned before, at the end of season 1, we did a Sam Harris is wrong about everything episode, using the same poetic license, exaggerating a little bit. We also did a Jordan Peterson is wrong about everything episode.
Jenn is not.
And you never know.
If Jenn were to write a book, it would be a logic textbook. That's the book I would write.
Actually, all seriousness, you should do that. But I think that would probably be a really good textbook. But
it would certainly be better than anything else that's out there, because I couldn't possibly do any worse.
Yeah, a lot of not great logic textbooks out there. I guess maybe there are people out there who are using Give Them an Argument as a logic textbook. You guys keep doing that, but everybody else. So we did the Sam Harris wrong about everything episode. We did the Jordan Peterson's wrong about everything episode, and we started to feel bad because Ben Shapiro was surely feeling a little left out. So
I doubt it.
On Monday we are doing the Ben Shapiro's wrong about everything episode with Nathan Robinson and Gene Bajalan. So that should be a lot of fun. And on Wednesday, there might be a debate happening here Still trying to nail that down, so stay tuned. And on Friday, we will be back for this. All right. I think those are our pluggables. So thank you, everybody, for watching, and thank you especially for the super chats. And for this, more appropriate this time than ever before. Left is best.
Left is best.